The life story of a Russian poet during the Stalin-era is not the most obvious form of entertainment for British teenagers in 2012, but that is exactly the subject of a new play that opens in London this week ahead of a nationwide tour. The play is called Stalin's Favourite, and it narrates the rise to fame and influence of the Russian poet Konstantin Simonov. And, according to Rupert Wickham, who adapted and stars in the one-man show, educating young British people is what his play is all about. Here is how the actor and writer put it.
People don't know anything about Stalin. A lot of people know nothing about Stalin. And there are some very important lessons to be learned from knowing a bit about that history.
The play brings together the story of the poet Simonov's early years of hardship growing up in a military family. His life spanned the Russian Revolution of 1917 and the Second World War, during which time he worked as a military correspondent and won literary acclaim. During this period, his work attracted the attention of the Soviet premier, Joseph Stalin. The steely leader apparently took a fancy to the young man's work, hence the name of the play, Stalin's Favourite. This propelled Simonov into a world of exclusive Moscow parties, foreign job postings, and his marriage to the actress Valentina Serova. Some of his major literary successes were produced during the war, when Russia was battling for its very survival against the Nazi war machine. One of his poems, Wait for Me, is a love message from a soldier on the front lines to his sweetheart back home. It was addressed to his future wife, the movie star Serova, and struck a chord with a nation embroiled in a grueling military struggle. Here is the final verse of the poem that captured Russia's romantic imagination during one of its darkest periods.
Wait for me, and I'll come back, dodging every fate. What a bit of luck, they'll say, those who would not wait. They will never understand how, amidst the strife, by your waiting for me, dear, you had saved my life. Only you and I will know how you got me through. Simply, you knew how to wait. No one else but you.
The play was adapted from Orlando Fige's book, The Whisperer, which offers personal accounts of ordinary lives from the Stalin era. Here, Wickham explains why he chose to focus on the character of Simonov. He was speaking amid the crowds gathered at the National Theatre in London, so we apologise for the background noise.
I was looking for someone to illustrate Stalin's time in power, and I didn't want someone who was too high up in the system, because then it becomes history of being about someone making decisions and that sort of thing. So I wanted someone who was involved, very emotionally involved in the time, obviously, so it doesn't become a kind of lecture what you're doing, but also someone who would be well informed about what was going on. So it had to be someone who knew about things or would known of things, which is not necessarily the case in the, in the 70s that people would have done. And I also wanted someone who was a flawed character, so he wasn't some sort of heroic person, because I think that's difficult to relate to as an audience, but also someone who was not going to be sort of despicable, do you know what I mean? So someone who people could relate to, who was human, who was flawed, who you could in some ways judge, but also you could empathise with as well at the same time.
With his access to the Moscow high life and the corridors of power, Simonov witnessed the worst excesses of Stalin's rule. He knew of the jailing of perceived opponents in Siberia's gulags and the high price paid for fast-paced reforms of agriculture and industry. The poet saw all of this around him, but, like many others, never dared challenge the system that had brought him relative wealth and affluence. As Wickham explains, Simonov failed to protest.
And he's very well aware of that as well. And I think that's one of the terrible regrets of his life, but actually I think he's very human as well, I mean, I think what you see in the play is not someone who is at all heroic, very cowardly, and often in all sorts of situations. But you also get to understand why he did what he did, and you get to have some sympathy for him. And also, if you see the circumstances of his childhood and the family connections and all those sort of things, there are elements of it which are deeply one can empathise with, and I think that's a part of the point of this play and of all drama, is to sort of put you in the position and go, have a look at this, don't judge it, have a look at it, and have a think about what you might have done in that situation, and through that you'll perhaps understand a little bit more about these sort of events of history, which are really difficult to understand otherwise. They're very difficult to emotionally, personally understand, you know, millions of people dying, people not standing up for people behaving appallingly in a way that they wouldn't in their normal lives, and that you and I would think, if we just took it at face value, you'd go, oh, well, that's dreadful behaviour. But, you know, the circumstances make it rather different.
The play opens in London on Wednesday before showing to school children, students and history buffs throughout the spring. Wickham, who plays Simonov, says the show is more than just an addition to history textbooks and school courses. Since Stalin's death in 1953, Russia has witnessed both support and abomination for the mustachioed Georgian leader. His statues and personality cult were torn down across the Soviet Union from 1956 onwards. But revisionists argue that Stalin should be remembered for industrial progress and military victories more than the millions who perished during his rule. This recent shift in attitudes worried President Dmitry Medvedev so much in 2009 that he felt compelled to remind Russians of horrors from the Stalin era. This is how Medvedev put it in his video blog.
Let's just think about it. Millions of people died because of terror and false accusations. Millions. They were deprived of all rights, even the right to a decent human burial. And for many years their names were simply crossed out from history. Yet even now we can hear voices claiming that those numerous deaths were justified by some supreme goals of the state.
Wickham, the actor and playwright, has the same concerns as Medvedev. He wants his play to send a signal to those who gloss over the murky parts of Stalin's rule. Indeed, he thinks Russian revisionism is a worrying trend.
Well, I think it is a dangerous development that's happening in the Soviet Union now, the polishing up of Stalin. You know, there was a survey conducted by a Moscow radio station to find out who was the greatest Russian ever, and Stalin came third in that poll. It's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, it's insidious, the way that his whole image is being polished up, and scary as well, the thought that, you know, there are, as he says in the play, it won't be easy for Alexei to right the wrongs of the past, and there are a lot of influential people who have a vested interest in perpetrating those lies, and that's exactly what's happening now.
That was Rupert Wickham, who adapted and stars in the one-man show Stalin's Favourite, which begins a UK tour this week.